Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house was supposed to be warm, cozy, a moment to reconnect. I'm Fiona Grant, 28, and I thought I'd finally feel like I belonged. I was wrong. Halfway through the meal, my brother stood, his glass raised high, smirk, sharp as a blade. "To the most cursed failure in this family," he said, staring me down. The words hit like a punch. My mom laughed loud and careless. My dad joined in, clinking his glass. Only my grandma's eyes met mine, soft with pity, her hand brushing my arm. I forced a smile, my heart pounding, and raised my glass back. "Cheers," I said, voice steady cold. "You just toasted to everything you're about to lose." His glass slipped, shattering on the table. The room went dead silent, forks frozen midair. No one spoke. I felt their stares, but I didn't flinch. Something snapped in me that night, something bigger than his words. Something that had been building for years. What happened next? Let's just say it wasn't the dinner anyone expected. Stick around to see how it all unraveled. If you're hooked on family drama that hits hard, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Don't miss how this story explodes. You won't see it coming. That Thanksgiving dinner at my folks' place was supposed to be this warm, fuzzy get-together, you know? A chance to actually connect with everyone. I'm Fiona Grant, I'm 28, and I was really hoping I'd finally feel like I fit in. Man, was I ever wrong about that. We were barely halfway through the meal when my brother gets up, raises his glass way up high, and gives me this smirk, all razor sharp and nasty. "Here's to the biggest screw-up in the whole family," he announces, staring right daggers at me. Those words just landed like a straight-up punch to the gut. My mom lets out this loud, carefree laugh. And my dad, he joins right in, clinking his glass with everyone else. The only person who even looked at me with any kind of sympathy was my grandma, her eyes all soft and sad, and she just barely touched my arm. I forced myself to smile, even though my heart was going a million miles an hour, and I raised my glass back at them. "Cheers," I said, my voice as steady and cold as I could manage. "You just toasted to everything you're about to lose, so congrats on that." And just like that, his glass goes slipping right out of his hand, shatters all over the table. The room went completely silent. Every fork in the room froze right in midair. Nobody said a single word. I could feel them all staring at me, but I wasn't about to flinch. Something just broke inside me that night. Something way bigger than just his stupid words. Something that had been building up for years and years. What happened after that? Let's just put it this way. It was definitely not the kind of dinner anyone was expecting. Hang tight and see how it all fell apart. If you're into family drama that really hits you hard, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to ring the bell too. You definitely don't want to miss how this whole story just blows up. Trust me, you will never see it coming. I brought my homemade pumpkin pie to my parents' house for Thanksgiving dinner. I'd spent hours perfecting it, hoping it had sparked some warmth in a family that rarely noticed me. Was the one who always showed up, always tried. My job in marketing paid the bills, but it never earned me a seat at the table. Not the way my brother did. I walked into their Des Moines home, the smell of turkey and stuffing already thick in the air. My mom was fussing over the table settings, my dad carving the bird like it was his one job of the year. I set the pie down, expecting maybe a nod, a smile. Nothing, just mom muttering about how the napkins weren't right. My brother swaggered in late, phone in hand, grinning like he owned the place. He was all flash new sneakers. A watch that screamed money he didn't have. "Check out my latest post," he said, shoving his screen toward my cousin. A blurry Instagram shot of him at some rooftop bar captioned, "Living my best life." My cousin raised an eyebrow. "How do you afford that?" he asked, voice sharp. My brother just laughed, brushing it off with a shrug. "I got my ways," he said, scrolling through likes. I caught my grandma's eye across the table. She gave me a small nod, her lips curling slightly at the pie. "Looks delicious," she whispered. I clung to that, but no one else cared. Mom beamed at my brother, piling his plate high with extra stuffing. "You always know how to light up a room," she said, her voice dripping with pride. Dad grunted in agreement, passing him the gravy. I sat there, my fork heavy in my hand, watching them fawn over him. My pie sat untouched, shoved to the side for canned cranberry sauce. I tried to join the conversation, mentioning a big campaign I'd just wrapped at work. "That's nice," Mom said, barely looking up. My brother snorted. "Marketing? Sounds like you're just making ads for toothpaste or something." His smirk cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Mom laughed like it was a great joke. Dad didn't even look up. I pushed my plate forward, forcing a smile. "It's more than toothpaste?" I said, keeping my voice even. "I closed a deal that brought in $20,000 for the company." Silence. My cousin glanced at me, impressed, but Mom quickly changed the subject. "Tell us about that bar," she said to my brother. He launched into a story about some influencer party named Dropping People I'd never heard of. I felt my chest tighten like the air was being sucked out of the room. I brought my homemade pumpkin pie over to my parents' house for Thanksgiving dinner that year. I'd literally spent hours in the kitchen, trying to get it just right, hoping it might spark a little bit of warmth in this family that barely ever even noticed I was there. I was always the one who showed up, always the one who tried to make things work. My job in marketing, it paid the bills, sure, but it definitely never earned me a real seat at the table, not like my brother always did. I walked into their place in Des Moines, and the smell of turkey and stuffing just hit you like a wall. My mom was all stressed out, fussing over the table settings, and my dad was carving the turkey like it was the only job he had all year long. I set my pie down on the counter, hoping for at least a nod, maybe even a smile. But nothing. Just my mom muttering about how the napkins weren't exactly right. My brother just swaggers in, late as always, his phone stuck to his hand and grinning like he owns the whole darn place. He was all decked out in the latest flashy stuff. Brand new sneakers, a watch that just screamed money that he definitely didn't have. "Hey, check out my latest post," he says, shoving his phone screen right in my cousin's face. It was some blurry Instagram shot of him at some fancy rooftop bar, with a caption that said something like, "Living my best life." My cousin just raised an eyebrow at him. "How can you even afford all that?" he asked, and you could definitely hear the edge in his voice. My brother just laughs, brushes it off with a shrug of his shoulders. "I got my ways," he says, and goes right back to scrolling through all his likes. I caught my grandma's eye from across the table. She gave me this small nod, her lips just barely curling up a little as she looked at my pie. "That looks absolutely delicious," she whispered to me. I just clung to that little bit of kindness, but nobody else even seemed to care. My mom just beams at my brother, piling his plate sky high with extra stuffing. "You always know how to light up a room," she said, and her voice was just dripping with pride. My dad just grunted in agreement and passed him the gravy. I just sat there, my fork feeling all heavy in my hand, just watching them fawn all over him. My pie just sat there untouched, pushed off to the side to make room for some canned cranberry sauce. I tried to join in the conversation, mentioning this huge campaign that I just wrapped up at work. "Oh, that's nice," my mom said, barely even glancing up from her plate. My brother just snorted at that. "Marketing? Sounds like you just spend your days making ads for toothpaste or something like that." His smirk just cut a little bit deeper than I wanted to admit. My mom laughed like it was the funniest joke in the world. My dad didn't even bother to look up. I just pushed my plate forward a little and forced myself to smile. "It's a little bit more than toothpaste," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I just closed a deal that brought in $20,000 for the company." Silence. My cousin glanced over at me like he was actually impressed for once, but my mom just quickly changed the subject. "So, tell us all about that bar," she said to my brother. And he just launched right into this whole long story about some influencer party, just name-dropping people I'd never even heard of in my life. I could feel my chest tightening up like all the air was just being sucked right out of the room. Grandma reached over her hand, brushing mine. "Your pie is the best thing here," she said softly. I wanted to believe her, but the weight of their dismissal pressed harder. My brother kept going, his voice louder with every word. He bragged about a new jacket, a trip he was planning, all while sipping Dad's expensive wine. My cousin leaned in again. "Seriously, man, where's the money coming from? You got a job we don't know about." My brother's grin faltered just for a second before he waved it off. "Relax." "I'm good," he said, scrolling his phone again. Mom shot my cousin a look like he'd crossed a line. Dad just poured more wine. I stared at my plate, the pie's crust crumbling under my fork. I'd spent years propping him up, and they didn't even see it. Grandma's eyes stayed on me, steady and kind. She didn't say more, but her look said enough. She saw me, even if no one else did. I clung to that as my brother's voice filled the room, drowning out everything else. I didn't know then how much worse it would get, how his words would cut deeper before the night was over. But sitting there watching them hang on his every move, I felt something shift. I wasn't just invisible, I was disposable. And I was done letting it slide. Honey, your pie is honestly the best thing on this whole table, my grandma said softly, reaching her hand over and just barely brushing mine. I really wanted to believe her, but the weight of them all just blowing me off was getting heavier and heavier. My brother just kept right on going, his voice getting louder and more obnoxious with every single word. He was bragging about some new jacket he'd bought and some fancy trip he was planning, all while he was sipping on my dad's expensive wine. My cousin leaned in closer to him again. Seriously, man, where's all this money even coming from? You got some kind of secret job that we don't know anything about? My brother's grin just faltered for a tiny little second before he just waved it off like it was nothing. Relax, okay? I'm good, he said, and just went right back to scrolling on his phone. My mom shot my cousin this look like he had just crossed some invisible line that he wasn't supposed to cross. And my dad, he just poured himself some more wine. I just stared down at my plate, and the crust of my pie was just crumbling apart under my fork. I had spent years propping him up, helping him out with everything, and they didn't even see it, they didn't even notice. My grandma's eyes just stayed locked on me, steady and kind. She didn't say anything else, but her look just said it all. She saw me, even if nobody else in that room did. I just clung to that little bit of comfort as my brother's voice just filled up the whole room, just drowning out everything and everyone else. I didn't know it then, but things were just about to get so much worse, and his words were going to cut even deeper before the night was over. But sitting there, watching them just hang on his every single move, I just felt something inside me just shift. I wasn't just invisible, I was disposable. And I was absolutely done letting it slide. No one in the house knew my brother was only getting by because of me. For years, I'd been the one keeping his life from falling apart, pouring my own money and time into his mess. At 28, I was barely scraping by myself my marketing job, covering rent and bills with little left over. But my brother, he lived like he had it all. New clothes, fancy dinners, posts on Instagram that screamed success. The truth was uglier. 2 years ago, he called me voice shaking, begging for help. He'd racked up $10,000 in gambling debts, poker games, sports bets, all spiraling out of control. I wired the money my savings gutted because I couldn't let him drown. He promised to pay me back. He never did. It didn't stop there. Every month, I sent him cash for rent, $500, sometimes more, because he couldn't hold a job. He'd get hired charm, everyone, then quit when it got hard. I told myself it was temporary, that he'd figure it out. Instead, he spent the money on bar tabs and new sneakers, posting photos with captions like "chasing the dream." I even helped him build that fake image. I connected him with a friend in digital media, got him gigs to pose as an influencer. I edited his posts, suggested hashtags, made him look like someone who mattered. Thousands of followers bought it, but I was the one pulling the strings. He never said thank you. Not once. I text him reminders about the money, and he'd reply with emojis or excuses. I'm good for it. He'd say, then post another photo from some rooftop club. I kept quiet, hoping he'd change, hoping Mom and Dad would see who he really was, but they didn't. They saw what he wanted them to see. Mom would call gushing about his latest post. He's so creative, she'd say, like he was some visionary. He's just finding his passion. Dad was worse. He'd nod along, acting like my brother's nonsense was a master plan. They never asked how I was doing. Never wondered why I looked so tired. Nobody in that house had a clue that my brother was only even managing to get by because of me. For years and years, I had been the one who was basically keeping his entire life from just falling completely apart, pouring all of my own money and all of my own time into cleaning up his messes. Here I was, 28 years old, barely scraping by myself, my marketing job just barely covering rent and all the bills, with pretty much nothing left over. And my brother? He was just living like he had it all. New clothes, fancy dinners, all those posts on Instagram that just screamed success. But the truth was so much uglier than that. It was a couple of years ago now, when he called me, his voice all shaking and desperate, just begging for help. He had racked up $10,000 in gambling debts, poker games, sports bets, and his whole life was just spiraling, totally out of control. I wired him the money, basically just gutting my entire savings, because I just couldn't stand the thought of him drowning like that. He promised he would pay me back, of course, but he never did. And it didn't even stop there. Every single month, I was sending him cash for his rent, $500, sometimes even more, because he just couldn't hold down a job. He'd get hired, charm the pants off of everybody, and then he would just quit as soon as things started getting hard. I kept telling myself that it was just temporary and that he would eventually figure things out. But instead, he was just spending all of the money on bar tabs and new sneakers, posting all those photos with captions like "chasing the dream." I even went so far as to help him build up that completely fake image that he was portraying online. I connected him with a friend of mine who is in digital media, got him a bunch of gigs to pose as an influencer. I edited all of his posts, suggested all the hashtags, just did everything I could to make him look like someone who actually mattered. Thousands of followers bought into it, but I was the one who was really pulling all the strings behind the scenes. And he never even said thank you, not even once. I would send him text messages reminding him about the money, and he would just reply with a bunch of emojis or lame excuses. "I'm good for it," he would say, and then post another photo from some rooftop club. I just kept quiet, hoping that he would change, hoping that my mom and dad would finally see who he really was. But they didn't. They just saw exactly what he wanted them to see. My mom would call me up, just gushing about his latest post. "He's just so creative," she would say, like he was some kind of visionary or something. "He's just trying to find his passion." My dad was even worse. He would just nod along, acting like my brother's nonsense was all part of some kind of master plan. They never even asked me how I was doing. They never even wondered why I always looked so tired. I tried talking to them once a year ago over coffee at their house. I hinted at the money, the debts I'd covered. "He's struggling a bit," I said, choosing my words carefully. Mom cut me off. "He's young," she said like I was ancient at 28. "He needs time to figure things out. You're stable. You don't need the attention." Dad just sipped his coffee, saying nothing. I left feeling like I'd betrayed him by even bringing it up. They didn't know about the late nights I spent balancing my budget to cover his rent, the weekends I skipped plans to fix his social media posts. They didn't know I was barely holding it together. The worst part, I started believing I had to keep doing it. He was my brother family, right? If I stopped, what would happen? He'd crash and somehow it would be my fault. I'd lie awake calculating how much more I could give before I broke. $10,000 in debts, countless rent payments, hours spent crafting his online persona. It added up. Not just money, but pieces of me, my energy, my patience, my trust. And for what? So he could flash a smile on Instagram and pretend he'd earned it. Mom and Dad's blind spot made it worse. They'd call him charismatic, full of potential. They'd brag about his followers to their friends like it meant something. I wanted to scream the truth that his life was a lie I'd paid for. But I didn't. I swallowed it. Let it burn inside me. Every time I saw his posts, every time Mom praised him, it felt like a slap. I was invisible, my sacrifices erased. I wasn't just carrying him. I was carrying their delusions too. I kept going because I thought it was what family did. But that night, after the dinner, something shifted. I couldn't unsee their faces, Mom's laugh, Dad's nod, my brother's smirk. I'd given everything, and they didn't even notice. I was done being the one who held it all together, while he played the star. I even tried talking to them about it once, maybe a year or so ago, over coffee at their house. I tried to hint at the money, all the debts that I had been covering for him. "He's struggling a little bit," I said, trying to choose my words as carefully as I possibly could. But my mom just cut me right off. "He's young," she said, like I was ancient or something at the ripe old age of 28. "He just needs some time to figure things out. You're stable, you're doing just fine. You don't need all the attention." My dad just sat there sipping his coffee, not saying a single word. And I just left there, feeling like I had somehow betrayed him by even bringing the whole thing up in the first place. They had no idea about all of the late nights that I was spending, trying to balance my budget just to cover his rent, or all of the weekends that I had skipped out on plans just to fix all of his social media posts. They had absolutely no clue that I was barely even holding it all together myself. And the worst part about it all was that I was starting to believe that I just had to keep on doing it. He was my brother, he was family, right? And if I stopped, what would even happen? He would just crash and burn, and somehow it would end up being all my fault. I would literally lie awake at night, just calculating how much more I could possibly give before I just broke completely. $10,000 in gambling debts, countless rent payments, all those hours I had spent crafting his online persona. It all just added up. And it wasn't just money, it was pieces of me. My energy, my patience, my trust. And for what? Just so he could flash a smile on Instagram and pretend that he had actually earned all of it. My mom and dad's complete blind spot about the whole thing just made it even worse. They would call him charismatic and full of potential. They would brag about his followers to all of their friends like it actually meant something. I just wanted to scream the truth at them, that his whole life was a complete lie that I was the one who was paying for. But I didn't. I just swallowed it all down and just let it burn inside me. Every single time that I saw one of his posts, every single time that my mom praised him, it just felt like a slap right in the face. I was completely invisible. All of my sacrifices were just erased, like they had never even happened. I wasn't just carrying him, I was carrying all of their delusions too. And I just kept on going because I thought that was just what family was supposed to do. But that night, after that terrible Thanksgiving dinner, something just shifted inside of me. I just couldn't unsee their faces, my mom's laugh, my dad's nod, my brother's smug smirk. I had given them everything, and they didn't even notice. I was absolutely done being the one who held it all together while he just got to play the star. The dinner was lively until my brother stood to raise his glass. His smile with sharp eyes locked on me like he'd been waiting for this moment. I braced myself, hoping it was just another of his boasts. Instead, he lifted his wine voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. "To the most cursed failure in this family," he said, staring straight at me. The words hit like a slap, sharp and public. Mom burst out laughing, her head thrown back like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. Dad raised his glass, chuckling, joining the toast without hesitation. My cousin froze fork halfway to his mouth, eyes darting between us. I felt the room shrink, every stare pinning me down. But then Grandma's hand found mine under the table, her grip warm, steady. "You're enough," she whispered so quiet only I could hear. I forced my face to stay calm, but my heart was racing. Years of bailing him out $10,000 for his gambling debts, monthly rent payments, crafting his fake Instagram fame flashed through my mind. And now this, I pushed my chair back, standing to meet his gaze. "I'm done," I said, my voice cutting through the laughter. "No more paying your debts. No more covering your rent. No more building your lies online. You're on your own." The table went silent, Mom's laugh dying in her throat. My brother's smirk vanished, his glass trembling in his hand. The Thanksgiving dinner was going along pretty lively up until the moment my brother decided to stand up and raise his glass. His smile was sharp and mean, and his eyes were just locked right on me, like he had been waiting for this exact moment the whole entire time. I just braced myself, just hoping that it was just going to be another one of his ridiculous boasts. But instead, he just lifted up his glass of wine and spoke loud enough so the entire table could hear every single word he said. "To the biggest, most cursed failure in this entire family," he said, staring right directly at me. The words just hit me like a slap in the face, sharp and completely public for everyone to see. My mom just burst out laughing, throwing her head way back like it was the absolute funniest thing she had ever heard in her whole entire life. My dad just raised his glass right along with him, chuckling to himself, joining in on the toast without a single moment of hesitation. My cousin just froze, his fork stuck halfway to his mouth, his eyes just darting back and forth between the two of us. I felt like the room was shrinking, with every single stare just pinning me right down. But then, my grandma's hand just found mine underneath the table. Her grip was warm and steady, like she was trying to tell me it was going to be okay. "You're enough, sweetie," she whispered, so quiet that only I could hear what she was saying. I forced my face to stay calm, but my heart was just racing a million miles an hour. All the years of me bailing him out of trouble, the $10,000 for his gambling debts, all those monthly rent payments, all those countless hours I had spent crafting his fake Instagram fame, it all just flashed right through my mind. And now, he does this. I just pushed my chair back and stood up to meet his gaze, staring right back at him. "I'm done," I said, my voice just cutting right through all of the laughter. "No more paying off your debts. No more covering your rent. And absolutely no more building all of your lies online. You're completely on your own from now on." The entire table just went completely silent. My mom's laugh just died right there in her throat. My brother's smirk just completely vanished, and his glass was just trembling in his hand. I was just joking," he stammered, glancing at Mom for backup. Mom's face twisted, her voice sharp. "You're being too sensitive," she said, leaning forward. He didn't mean it like that. "Don't ruin the night." Dad nodded, his tone firm. "Let's keep the peace, okay? It's Thanksgiving." My cousins shifted uncomfortably, saying nothing. I could feel their judgment, like I was the one breaking the family apart. But Grandma squeezed my hand again, her eyes locked on mine, full of quiet pride. She didn't need to speak. I knew she saw me. Really saw me. That gave me the strength to keep going. "No," I said, my voice steadier now. "I'm not the one ruining anything. I've paid for his mistakes for years. I've emptied my savings, worked extra hours, fixed his messes, and you all just clap for him." I turned to my brother, his face pale. "You called me a failure. Look in the mirror. You've got nothing without me." Mom gasped, hand to her chest. "That's enough," she snapped. "He's trying. You don't have to be so cruel." Dad shook his head, muttering about family unity. My cousin looked down, avoiding the fight, but Grandma's grip never wavered, her silence louder than their words. I wanted to scream about every late-night call, every dollar I'd sent, every post I'd written to make him look good. But I didn't. They wouldn't hear it. They never had. Instead, I looked at my brother, his eyes wide, like he finally realized what he'd lost. "Good luck," I said, my voice cold. "You'll need it." I pushed my plate away, the pumpkin pie I'd made, still untouched, and walked toward the door. Mom called after me, her voice a mix of anger and panic. "You're leaving over this," Dad added. "Come on, don't make a scene." I didn't turn back. Grandma's eyes followed me, her nod small but certain, like she knew I was doing the right thing. I was just joking around," he stammered, glancing over at my mom, hoping she would back him up. My mom's face just completely twisted up, and her voice was all sharp and nasty. "You're being way too sensitive about this," she said, leaning forward in her chair. "He didn't mean it like that," she said, like I was the one in the wrong. "Don't ruin the whole night," she said, as if it wasn't ruined already. My dad just nodded his head, and his tone was all firm and serious. "Let's just try to keep the peace here, okay? It's Thanksgiving, for crying out loud," he said. My cousin was just shifting uncomfortably in his chair, not saying a single word about anything. I could just feel their judgment coming down on me, like I was the one who was breaking the whole entire family apart. But my grandma just squeezed my hand again, and her eyes were just locked right on mine, full of quiet pride. She didn't even need to say anything out loud. I just knew that she saw me. She really, truly saw me, for the first time in a very long time. And that just gave me all of the strength that I needed to keep on going. "No," I said. My voice was a lot steadier now. "I'm not the one who's ruining anything here. I have been paying for his mistakes for years and years. I have emptied out my entire savings account. I have worked extra hours at my job. I have fixed all of his messes. And all of you just sit here and clap for him, and act like he's some kind of hero." I just turned to face my brother, and his face was completely pale. "You called me a failure," I said, looking right into his eyes. "Well, why don't you just take a good look in the mirror? Because you have absolutely nothing without me." My mom just gasped and put her hand right up to her chest. "That's enough," she snapped at me. "He's trying his best," she said, defending him as always. "You don't have to be so cruel about everything." My dad just shook his head back and forth, muttering something under his breath about family unity. My cousin just looked down at his plate, trying to avoid the fight, but my grandma's grip on my hand never wavered for a single second, and her silence was just way louder than any of their words could ever be. I just wanted to scream at them about every single late-night phone call that I had ever gotten from him, and about every single dollar that I had ever sent him, and about every single social media post that I had ever written just to try and